Oh howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. I wanted to tackle the question of stacked decks. Why are they so valuable this league? And what do people who are buying them actually hope to get out of them? Because it's not like people are just being irrational jackpot chasers when they're buying stacked decks. They are actually something that's quite profitable to sit in your hideout and open, if that's a type of gameplay that you can stomach, and if you can weather the tremendous variance that comes with doing stacked deck openings. So item flippers are buying stacked decks at 3.4 chaos. This is in bulk. These are people who don't want to just buy one or two of them off you. But if you have many hundreds of stacked decks, you'll find people who are willing to buy them for 3.4 chaos each in large bulk. And these are people who are item flippers. So these people are not really necessarily looking to use them themselves. I mean, I can't rule out that some of these individuals aren't opening them themselves, but usually the people who are opening them themselves in big bulk end up buying them in lots of 5,000 and paying slightly more. The people who are buying them in random numbers generally are trying to aggregate them up into lots of 5,000 or more that they can then turn around and sell at a higher price. If you're willing to cut out this middleman and sell them direct to the end consumer yourself, then you can actually get a slightly higher price. You might get 3.5, even 3.55 or 3.6 chaos each, if you're willing to wait for the right buyer to contact you. A lot is known about the way that stacked decks work now. In the last year or so, there's been a major player-run research project that has cracked the way that stacked decks work. There's reverse engineered the formula that they use for determining which divination card to give you, and all of the RNG that goes into that, and also from analysing very, very, very large sample sizes of stacked decks, drop weights for all divination cards in the game have since been estimated as well. The sample size of divination cards that have been recorded from stacked decks is literally more than 2 million stacked decks, and this has been a 5-league project. Data for 1 million of these decks is very, very thorough, where every single card was recorded, and this has come from a number of people working together. And if there's any extreme outliers, like for instance if one person got Reign of Chaos 3% of the time and another person reported getting it 12% of the time, then this sort of thing would be looked into to work out how it had happened, and any questionable data would then be removed from the pool. But amongst the data that is considered reliable, there's over 1 million that have been thoroughly recorded where every card's been tracked, and a further 1 million where only the rarest and more valuable cards have been tracked. Now, card drop rates do sometimes change, and there have been some documented changes between 3.18 and 3.22. For example, Humility appears to be 5 times rarer in patch 3.22 than it was in patch 3.18, and no, I have no idea why GGG would make that decision. But when this does happen on a card that is high profile in any way, it's pretty obvious. When it happens on a card that's low profile, and this is generally a card that is a low value divination card that is also very rare, for example Further Invention, changes to cards like that can fly under the radar for a longer period of time. But for high profile and also medium profile cards, this information is definitely picked up really quickly and is something that is taken into account by everyone that considers doing a large number of stacked deck openings. To give a couple of concrete examples of this, the Spark and the Flame, the divination card for Beric's Respite, was made massively more common in patch 3.19. Additionally, the divination card Asenath's Gift for a double corrupted Asenath's Gentle Touch was also made massively more common in that league. Or to take something a little bit more recently, with the recent Breach rework, the divination cards The Chosen and the Price of Loyalty were made considerably rarer as well. All of these have been worked out by players. So, where is the value in stacked decks? Well, let me tell you that it's all in pretty much 20 divination cards. There are 20 divination cards that are the biggest contributors to expected value. And when I'm talking about expected value, this means that if you were to open tens and tens of millions of stacked decks, the expected value that's contributed by a specific card is going to be the average amount that you would get if you only picked up that card very long term. For example, I say here that the Apothecary's EV is about 0.96 chaos. What this means is that if you opened 1 billion stacked decks, which is obviously something that's impossible, then you would expect to get 960 million chaos worth of Apothecaries over that 1 billion stacked decks. But if you only open 16,000 stacked decks, then you would expect on average to get just less than 1. But there is a reasonably high chance of getting exactly 0, something like 38%. And the percentage chance of getting 2 or more copies is going to be in the 30% range as well. It turns out that it's 18% to get exactly 2, 7.7% to get 3 or more. So you're definitely not guaranteed to get exactly 1, even though it will be the most likely individual outcome. For the Doctor, you're probably going to get 2 if you rip 18,000 decks, but you have a very real chance of getting exactly 0. And that is where variance comes in. This is a case where the odds are rigged in your favour, but they're not rigged in your favour so decisively that you can't bust out. An analogy you could consider would be if one of your friends decided to offer you a wager where they said, all right, we're going to bet on a coin flip. If it comes up heads, I give you $2, and if it comes up tails, you give me $1. This is going to be rigged heavily in your favour, and you'd be taking advantage of your friend in this situation. But if you've only got $2 in your wallet, you've got a 25% chance of busting out almost immediately on your first 2 coin flips. With stacked decks, the odds are much less rigged in your favour. They are rigged in your favour, and you will win in the very long term, but the very long term is not the thousands, it's not the tens of thousands. It is in the hundreds of thousands. That's when you start getting to the point that you're pretty much guaranteed to make currency out of ripping stacked decks. Until that point, the odds aren't rigged strongly enough in your favour that you're guaranteed to win. However, if we take the exact average, then you'll find that these 20 cards combine to provide about 3.49 chaos on average in expected value for every stacked deck that gets opened. This means that people who are opening stacked decks chasing the big jackpots, they're not being irrational, they're not throwing away currency in doing that. They're going for a gamble that on average the odds are rigged slightly in their favour, but they're not rigged in your favour by enough that you're guaranteed to win. We've mentioned here that you can get less lucky than the average, but you also have the chance of getting more lucky than average, and some people do chase that thrill as well. The thing is that all of these 20 cards are quite rare. Only 2 of them are even remotely common. These are the Patient at about 1 in 683 stacked decks, and Monochrome at 1 in 1200. And then there's a few more that are sort of somewhere around there. There's Sephiroth at 1 in 1718. So while I was in editing mode, I picked up a mistake that was made in this section of the video. That is that Divine Beauty's drop rate had been underestimated in the original draft of this table. So I put the correct table here. The only change is Divine Beauty has moved up several slots, and that's because it was added only quite recently, and as a result was not something that was able to be looted in every single league that the Divination cards have been tracked for. That meant that we underestimated how frequently it drops from stacked decks. It's actually close to 1 in 1250, which makes it one of the better cards. You have the Sephiroth, you have the Nurse, a few others that are more common than 1 in 3000, but ultimately these cards are all pretty rare. And it is very common to open 1,000 stacked decks, and the only things you get from this list are 2 copies of the Patient, 1 copy of Monochrome, and then you get 997 junk cards. Of course, you could have instead gotten an Apothecary in that 1,000 cards as well. Now these odds are best estimates. These are not guaranteed to be right. They could easily be off by 15% on the Apothecary, and they could be off by more than that on the rarer cards. Even though there is a sample size of 2 million cards, it is a significant sample size, but it is not big enough here. One card that's not mentioned here is the Void. This card is relatively common compared to everything on this list. It's about 1 in 150, and it's something that you can only really sell if you've got big bulk of it. But if you do have many dozens of Void cards, you can definitely sell them for 10 chaos each. Every league, someone just like me makes a video where they open 100 copies of the Void, and they end up getting almost nothing for it. But because they don't want to do 100 individual trades to get all those Void cards, they usually just look for someone that has 50 or more of them, and the price for 50 or more of them tends to be 10C each. There are a bunch of other cards that contribute a small amount that does add up. The cards for Shaper Guardian maps, Elder Guardian maps, Exalted Orbs, all these sorts of things, they don't add a lot individually to the expected value of a stacked deck, but they do add up, and as a result they're also worth considering as well. But most of your value is going to come from these 20 cards. These 20 cards, if these are the only things you pick up, you're going to average 3.5 chaos for every stack deck that you open. On the flip side, if you pick up every single card that will realistically sell, you're only going to raise that 3.5 to about 4 chaos. So why is it that stack decks keep getting better every new expansion? Well, when Divination cards were new, people knew less about what would make a highly desirable and impactful Divination card. And also, not everyone aims to change the Trade League economy in any case. There are plenty of Divination cards that were made as a card for a personal favourite item, or something that was designed as a target farmable thing for solo self-found. And some Divination cards just haven't stood the test of time very well. However, a number of cards were also commissioned by people who bought the Highgate Supporter Pack, which had the Divination card commission in it, but they bought it for its other contents, and so they didn't really care about the Divination card. That meant that there's a lot of Divination cards that came out early that were pretty low impact. Now that grinding gear games seldom offer Divination card commissions, more thought on average goes into each one, and this means that newer cards bias towards having a higher impact than older cards did. Even with new cards frequently being quite rare, like the Apothecary at 1 in 16,000 stacked decks, they still show up often enough to matter in stacked decks, because stacked decks reduce the bias against the rarest card. As an example here, the maps that contain the Apothecary also contain a much more common divination card called the Journalist. The Journalist is about 1,500 times as common as the Apothecary as a direct drop from a monster, but in stacked decks, it's only about 120 times rarer to get an Apothecary than to get a Journalist. Also, we've got to keep in mind that 3.22 is a league of major inflation. I did a separate video on that. I'll link it in the bottom left corner of the screen in the last 20 seconds of this video. But the main culprit there is Sanctum. Unless and until Sanctum is nerfed, rare things that Sanctum can't produce, such as Mageblood, such as Headhunter, these things are going to keep going up in price, and this is going to make stacked decks and consequentially make Heist into more alluring mechanics than they otherwise would be. Now, there is a major project underway at the moment to work out drop rates on every divination card in the game. Many of the individuals behind the PathOfExile wiki project, the new wiki, this is POEwiki.net, they've been working on a spreadsheet with drop rate estimates for all divination cards in the game. I've been a small part of this, but it's mostly been other people. Poor Fishwife, Krolya, Nerdy Joe, and a few others have been working on this. Now, this has existed before, this spreadsheet, and there is a 3.18 version, there is a 3.20 version that are going around, but a 3.22 version is in the works and it should be out sometime soonish. My main contribution to it has been bulk prices on the 200 most common divination cards, which is a relatively small thing compared to consolidating all of the information that's gone into it. But this is something that can help you work out the actual numbers behind whether your planned stacked deck investment is an investment or whether you're just throwing money against the wall. Of course, even if the odds are rigged in your favour, RNG can always decide to rain on your parade anyway. I'm going to leave it there though. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and may you get the stacked deck results that you deserve.